Dievčatá, chlapci, vítajte pri ďalšom BioFit streame a respektíve Biocaste. Už som to zlúčil. Jak si mohol všimnúť napríklad, tak BioFit kanál ako taký, to poviem ešte takto na začiatok. Tí, ktorí ináč pozeráte tento stream zo záznamu, tak pokojne preskočte, dobre? Toto je len taký úvod s tými, ktorí sú aktuálne online. A chat, dajte mi prosím vás vedieť, že či hudba je počuť, či mňa je počuť, vidieť a tak ďalej, aby sme si tieto technické veci vychytali hneď teraz na úvod. A poviem iba k tomu kanálu, kým sa mi vyjadrite v čete, že ten BioFit kanál som zlúčil, respektíve tie veci som presunul a všetko budem dávať už len na Biocast. Dobre, tak len aby ste vedeli, že ten Biocast bude hlavný kanál. A ďakujem všetkým, tým 47, ktorí tam boli, ktorí ste tam boli a ktorí ste odoberali ten kanál, tak som ho presunul na ten hlavný, kde robím vlastne aj tie podcasty s hostiami a kde budeme robiť tieto live streamy, kde si spolu budeme pozerať či už nejaký zaujímavý podcast, nejakou zaujímavou témou alebo niečo vtipné a tak ďalej, proste to, čo ma nejakým spôsobom zaujíma a verím, že možno to nejakým spôsobom aj posunie teba, však hlavne kvôli tomu to robím, aby to nejakým spôsobom posunulo ostatných ľudí. A presne o tom bola vlastne aj tá téma, čo sme začali minule, čo bola táto pani Feldmenová Barrettová, profesorka psychológie. Minule sme pozerali teda prvú časť, konkrétne nejakých 50 minút z toho videa, čiže keď si ho nevidel, tak ti odporúčam pozrieť. A pokiaľ si tu na tú druhú časť, tak vítaj. V tej prvej časti také, že hlavné veci, ktoré som si odnesol, a taká hlavná myšlienka, že ten náš mozog je non-stop pripravený na predikcie. Čiže neustále spracúva informácie, ktoré sa dejú okolo nás. Je naučený z toho, čo sme zažili v minulosti, z nejakých skúseností a snaží sa stále predikovať to, čo môže nastať a práve to môžeme zmeniť napríklad takým spôsobom, že sa vrátime v rámci terapie napríklad do minulosti, že tam ten odborník a psychoterapeut zmení pár vecí a potom tým pádom dokážeme vnímať tie veci trošičku ináč. Miška, čau. Takže to ma zaujalo. Okrem toho tam bolo veľmi veľa zaujímavých ďalších vecí, ako napríklad to, že keď má človek napríklad úzkosť alebo má depresie a chce urobiť nejaké zmeny vo svojom živote, či už sa to týka životosprávy alebo niečo podobné, tak je to veľmi energeticky náročné pre takého človeka, pretože už len ten samotný nervový systém má dosť roboty s tým, aby stiahol ten tlak, čiže deep press, akože ten tlak, ktorý tam nastáva z toho, že neustále vyhodnocuje ako hrozbu možno ten nervový systém, tak sa ho snaží ako keby ukludniť. Už len to samotného človeka dokáže vyčerpať veľmi energeticky. Takže pozri si tú prvú časť, podľa mňa tam bolo veľmi veľa zaujímavých vecí a ja sa budem tešiť dnes na tú druhú časť spolu s tebou, takže pokiaľ všetko funguje, Miško, všetko funguje, chat? Že všetko fičí? Hudba. Dobre, hudbu vypnem. A keby náhodou, že nebolo vidieť alebo počuť, tak mi dajte vedieť do chatu, aby som to upravil, dobrá? Díkyčko. Dobre, tak dávam to na celé a ideme ďalej teda.
Make ourselves sad because we see how other people on TikTok or Instagram are feeling, and it made me think that you must think the world is crazy to some degree. You must see social contagion in the world where suddenly everybody becomes traumatized because trauma's become almost popular, you know, to think about what happened to you.
Sekundu, na chvíľku tu zastavím, teraz by to malo byť v pohode. Ešte trošku? Ešte trochu nahlas? OK. Skúsme teraz.
Create meaning to it and then suffer that meaning. But there's other types of social contagion where which are spreading through society. I mean, young people are getting more and more anxious. They're getting more and more depressed. We're self-diagnosing ourselves with different illnesses and different things. But now you've explained to me how the brain works. I'm thinking, gosh, as a society, we are bonkers.
Well,
we're living out lies.
Yeah, I guess the way I do find it frustrating at times, but only because I think we are meaning makers. Animals are meaning makers. We create meaning.
Ešte sekundu, na chvíľku to zastavím. Keby ste mali nejaké otázky alebo niečo povedať, kľudne do chatu, dobre? Kľudne píšte do chatu a ja sa k tomu akože z času na čas to zvyknem zastaviť a trošku sa k tomu vyjadriť. Alebo keby tam náhodou niečo nebolo zrozumiteľné anyway, každopádne kľudne píšte.
We create meaning by virtue of living, like by virtue of interacting with things in the world, by interacting with each other. Very few meanings are given that they exist independently of us. And so what I find frustrating is that there's a lot of suffering. And understanding these basic operating principles of the brain will not remove all suffering, but it could ameliorate, it could remove some. And people don't understand that they are sometimes making their suffering worse than it has to be.
You paused on the word responsible.
Well, I want to be really clear that, again, I'm not saying people are to blame. Culpability and responsibility are not the same thing. Culpability is blame. Are you blameworthy? Right? I'm not saying people are to blame for their own suffering. I'm saying that people can be more responsible by taking more responsibility, they could reduce their suffering some. That's not the same thing as saying, that it's their cause to begin with. So I'll give you an example. Social contagion. Contagion is an interesting word. It means that you are infected by something. Even a virus. There are these experiments that were done 15, 20 years ago where these are done by Sheldon Cohen, who is a psychoimmunologist, which means he's a psychologist and he studies how immunology, that is your immune system, is related to your psychological state. And so what he did across a number of experiments is he took people and he sequestered them in hotel rooms. And then he took the same dosage, the same concentration of virus, and he put it in every person's nose. And then he controlled how much they slept, how much they ate. He measured their symptoms. He weighed their tissues after they blew their nose. I mean, he did, right? Just really, 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 really careful metrics. And across these experiments, somewhere between 20 to 40% of people became symptomatic with respiratory disease. That means the virus is necessary, but it is not sufficient to cause illness. Another necessary but not sufficient cause is the state of each person's immune system. That is, your brain and your immune system have to be in a particular state in order for you to be infected by a virus in these experiments. So the point that I'm making here is exactly the same about suffering. So let's take anxiety, for example. We in a culture, we automatically make meaning of certain types of signal patterns as anxiety. When there's a lot of uncertainty, there's an increase in norepinephrine and some chemicals in the brain. That often goes with an increase in heart rate and so on. And we automatically make meaning of this physical state as anxiety. But exactly the same physical state could be determination. It could be just pure uncertainty. Again, meaning making is about action, right? So when you are experiencing high arousal, even if it's super unpleasant as determination, you do something different than if you experience it as anxiety or uncertainty. So here's an example. There are people who experience test anxiety. Really serious test anxiety prevents people from finishing courses or graduating from college. People who graduate from college have a lifetime trajectory of earning that is hundreds of thousands of dollars more often than somebody who drops out of college. So test anxiety, over the long run, it's more than just a bit of discomfort. You know, it has serious implications for your earning potential across your life. Mm-hmm. There are these experiments that were done where they trained people to make sense of high arousal physical states, not as anxiety, but as determination. And these people learned to do this. First, they practice like a skill. It's like driving. At first, it's really hard. You have to give a lot of effort to it, but you practice, and then eventually it becomes really automatic. And then what happens? They're able to take tests. They're able to pass tests. They're able to continue taking courses and so on. I watched this actually happen right in front of my eyes. My daughter, when she was 12 years old, she was testing for her black belt in karate. Her sensei was a 10th degree black belt. This guy, a 10th degree black belt is the highest you could be. This guy could break a board like by looking at it. He was a scary, scary dude. And my daughter was like not even 5 feet tall when she was 12. And she's this tiny little thing. And she's got to spar with like these hulking, like 15, 16, 18-year-old boys. She's got to actually spar with them. And so, you know, and this is across several days. She's got to do this really. And so I'm sitting there, her dad and me were sitting there, we're watching her. And so her sensei, you know, saunters up to her and he says, "Sweetheart, get your butterflies flying in formation." And I was like, that's fucking amazing. Get your butterflies flying in formation. He's not saying, calm down, little girl. That would actually be bad. You don't want to be calm. You need that arousal. It's there for a reason. It's uncomfortable, but you need it. He's saying, use it. That to me was like a perfect example of find a different meaning for that arousal. And that meaning is...
No a toto by som sa chcel opýtať, že jak to vnímate, lebo že to, čo vlastne hovorí, aspoň ja to tak chápem, že je to o pohľade na tú danú vec. Že rovnako jak napríklad znovu ma nápadá, že cvičenie. Že môže sa na to pozerať, že mne sa nechce proste že ísť cvičiť, že to je hrozné, že musím ísť cvičiť, alebo že super, môžeme cvičiť, že vôbec je tu tá možnosť a rovnako jak keď si hodiny do nejakej situácie, aj keď je ťažká tá situácia a možno sa to hovorí ľahko, keď nie sme vyslovení tej priamo situácii, ale že vidíš v tom príležitosť, ako vyrásť napríklad, či už fyzicky, mentálne alebo akokoľvek. A to nehovorím, že teraz sa treba hádzať do každej nepríjemnej situácie, ale keď taká situácia nastane, tak to využiť na ten rast. Aspoň ja som to tak pochopil, to, čo povedala. Neviem, skúste povedať vy v čete, že jak to vnímate.
The action that you will engage in, no matter how hard it is, no matter how much it doesn't really look like what it's supposed to, the control is there. It's there. It's not there all the time. It's harder to get, yada, yada, but it's there. And it means that you have more agency. You have more control. You're never going to have as much control as you want. It's always going to be harder to get. Your options aren't always...
Ja to ešte na sekundu zastavím, sorry, ale napadlo mi presne to, čo hovorila vlastne v tej prvej časti, alebo v tej prvej, to, čo sme mali minule, ten prvý diel vo štvrtok, že niektorí ľudia majú tendenciu povedať, že tak proste je to tak ťažké a je za ten genetika napríklad. Hej? A teraz tým, že som to hodil napríklad na tú genetiku, tak som sa zbavil zodpovednosti za to, že nemusím teraz nič robiť, lebo za to môže tá genetika a tým pádom nemusím, som obeťou toho celého. Hej? A teraz nehovorím, teraz môže sa samozrejme stať, že človek má fakt zlú situáciu, aj geneticky to nevyhral, ale že nemusí to byť len tá genetika. Že častokrát niekto má samozrejme genetickú výhodu, niekto má trošku menej genetické výhody a podobne, ale že nie je to úplne nemenný stav. Ak pristúpim k tomu tak, že absolútne nič sa s tým nedá robiť, tak som sa zbavil zodpovednosti a nemusím tým pádom nič robiť. Ale pokiaľ zmením trošku ten mindset a využijem to ako príležitosť na tú zmenu, tak s tým dokážem niečo urobiť. A to je tá zmena mindsetu.
It's going to be the same. But you can always find a little more control over what you do and what you experience. And that's the key to living a meaningful life.
Are you somewhat concerned about the world that young people are growing up in, where they're scrolling on social media and social media is telling them what certain feelings are? So they are just being programmed constantly.
Yeah. They are.
To be anxious, to be depressed,
yes, they are.
To be sad.
Yes, they are. And think about it too. Social media is pernicious uncertainty there. You know, first of all, even when we're sitting face to face, we have all of these cues. We have all these signals. I can see your face. I can hear your voice. Even when all this information is there, there's still some uncertainty, right? We're not reading each other. Bodily movements are not a language to be read. It's a bad metaphor, right? We're guessing. We're always guessing. And we're using a lot of signals to guess. But when you're on social media, you have very few signals. There is a lot of ambiguity. There is a lot of uncertainty. And the only thing that you can do is fill in that uncertainty with your own guesses, which could be bad.
True.
Right? So people who go on TikTok and whatever are giving up, they're like volitionally giving up their agency and they don't know it.
What do you mean by that?
They're choosing to be led. They're choosing to be influenced. I'll give you an example. I've listened to podcasts about metabolism. I've listened to podcasts about, skincare. I've listened to, I'm curious. I'm curious about like what kind of information people put out there. I probably turn off 90% I get like 10 minutes into something and I will turn it off. That's what it means to be a consumer. You have choice. I think people they don't realize that by virtue of what they do and what they don't do, they are making choices about what will be retained in their heads that will then be used automatically later.
Brainwashing.
A little bit, except that you're the one you're choosing it. I'm empathic and I'm not blaming people, but things could be better for them, I mean, I had a daughter who was clinically depressed. That was one of the most frustrating experiences I've ever had in my life, in addition to being really tragic. I mean, I can talk about it now without breaking into tears. That took a long time.
Inými slovami, zase mám pocit, jak keby, takže kľudne ma opravte v chat, že tie veci, ktoré pozeráš, takže pasívna konzumácia, napríklad obsah na sociálnych sieťach, čo robíme všetci, to nie je nič nové a robiť to budeme samozrejme všetci, ale že nás môže ovplyvňovať do budúcnosti. Že ten obsah, ktorý vidíme, tak nás ovplyvňuje na že sa nám to ukladá a programuje nás na tie budúce naše reakcie. Že tým, že ten mozog sa učí neustále predikovať veci, tak tie veci, ktoré vidíme, tak sa nám ukladajú a programujú nás na ten náš budúci krok v budúcnosti, keď nastane taký moment, že kedy sa to využije.
But at first she was so resistant. Eventually, she made the decision that she wanted to be helped, and then we completely changed her life. But she had to make that decision. I couldn't force her to do it. And I feel like a little bit it's the same kind of situation now where there's so much bullshit out there in the wellness industry. There's so much, swirling around on TikTok and on other areas of social media, and not all of it is useful. And some of it's really harmful.
Do you mind if I pause this conversation for a moment? I want to talk about our show sponsor today, which is Shopify. I've always years on this from your .com have the advantage you have as a objective onlooker is you have a huge amount of information and knowledge which is guiding you to make better decisions. But a lot of people don't have that information and knowledge. In fact, they have counter information and knowledge. So when I think about what it takes for someone to make a change in their life, whether it was your daughter or whether it's someone else who feels like they're stuck and they feel like they're trapped in an algorithm or trapped in a life that they want to break out of, based on everything you know and based on the experience you had with your daughter, what is step one to being able to make that change? Because I'm really curious as to what it was about your daughter that made her decide that she wanted the help.
Well, I think that the general answer is baby steps. It rarely works to completely change everything all at once. I'm not saying it never works, but it rarely works that way. So, for example, you could deliberately get off social media for one day a week, or do something else instead with a friend, or go for a walk, or just and build it into your day as a scheduled thing. So that's the other thing, is that you can't do things because you want to do them. You have to force yourself to do them. So, for example, I had major back surgery, very serious. And I knew that after I had back surgery that I was going to experience sensations I had never had before. Just like, if you go for a filling in your tooth, right? And then something's there that wasn't there before. And then your tongue is like constantly poking at the tooth and you're not supposed to, but you do anyways, because your brain is foraging for information. It's foraging for prediction error. And then eventually it adjusts its predictions and then it ignores the sensations because they're not relevant, right? So that was going to happen on a massive scale for me. And I knew that. I had made a plan before surgery to dose myself appropriately with prediction error so that I would not develop chronic pain. Because chronic pain is like a set of bad predictions that don't update, right? So your brain still believes that there's tissue damage in your body when there's no more tissue damage.
So does that mean that pain often is just a figment of your imagination?
No, that's the wrong way. That is the wrong way to think about it. The way to think about it is every experience, remembered past and sensory present. So pain is in your head. Vision is in your head. Hearing is in your head. You don't hear in your ears, you hear in your head, in your brain. You don't see in your eyes. You need your eyes, you need your ears, but you don't see in your eyes, you see in your brain. So pain is a combination of just like vision is a combination of the remembered past and the sensory present.
Okay, so it's both.
So chronic pain happens when your brain was receiving signals from the body that there was tissue damage, nociceptive signals they're called, and it was making sense of them as pain. And when you're recovering from an illness, that's metabolically taxing. So there's not as much there's not as much of your metabolic budget devoted to learning. So you can be in a situation where your brain doesn't update itself and you still experience pain, even though the tissue damage is no longer there.
To je podobné jak fantomová ruka, nie? Alebo ten fantomov pocit, aspoň tak sa to tuším volá, že ti amputujú ruku z nejakého dôvodu, čo teda dúfam, že sa nikdy nestane, ale a cítiš ju tam stále, alebo cítiš svrbenie na tej ruke a podobne, lebo tvoj mozog stále vyhodnocuje, že to tam má. To je dobrá halus ináč.
Just like seeing a green apple in your mind's eye when there is no apple in front of you. It's not all in your head in the insulting sense. It's a normal consequence of how brains work.
The injury's gone though, but the signal of the injury is still replaying itself.
Yeah, exactly. Just like it's like a phantom limb. It's like tinnitus is also like that.
Oh gosh, yeah, I had that for a little while.
Yeah. So I tried really hard to set a schedule for myself, that would allow me to sort of like optimally dose myself, but with prediction error. But that meant, that I had to follow that schedule. And I think if you're committed to changing your habits, this is how you change any habit, really. You change the context and and then you practice. You practice new behaviors.
Yeah.
So with my daughter, depression, we think about depression in our lab as, let me back up and say, your brain's most important job really is not thinking, it's not feeling, it's not even seeing, it's regulating your body. It's regulating your metabolism, basically. That's your brain's most important job. Your brain's most important job is anticipating the needs of your body and preparing to meet those needs before they arise. The metaphor that we use for this predictive regulation of the body, which is the formal term is called allostasis, that's the scientific concept, but the metaphor is body budgeting. It's running a budget for your body. Your brain is running a budget for your body. It's not budgeting money, it's budgeting salt and glucose and oxygen and potassium and like all of the nutrients and chemicals that are necessary to run an energetically costly body. You've got all these really low-level kind of processes. You can just think of them as vital parts to keep yourself alive. Mm-hmm. So some of your energy budget goes to that. Some of your energy budget goes to repair and growth. So if you get taller, you need more cells. When you learn something, you have to thicken up your myelin and your neurons. You've got to grow more receptors and stuff. That's, the kind of growth and repair. And then the rest of it is all for anything effortful. What is effortful?
Like work or going to the gym.
Dragging your ass out of bed in the morning is effortful.
Yeah.
Learning something new is effortful. Dealing with uncertainty is effortful. Everything we call stress. Stress is just really your brain is predicting a big metabolic outlay because there's some effort involved, right? Some motivated effort involved. So those are the three things that make up your energy budget. And the really important point, you as an organism have a fixed amount of energy that you can produce in a day. Meaning ATP, like these little chemicals these little protein things that, your cells use as literal energy that come from glucose and other things like fats and...
So there's nothing I can do.
To je zaujímavá vec a zaujímalo by ma, že či to viem rozšíriť, akože tú kapacitu, to čo hovoríš, že každý deň máš danú kapacitu na to, aby si vedel fungovať, čiže máš nejaký rozpočet, to čo ona hovorí, napríklad aby si to vedel lepšie predstaviť, tak ako finančný rozpočet, tak rovnako máš rozpočet toho tela na ten deň a pokiaľ to minieš na hento, tak už ti viac nezostane zase na niečo iné, čiže keď to miniem hlavne na prácu a rodinu, tak mi nezostane napríklad energia na, na chôdzu, beh, cvičenie, whatever, hej, a podobne. Čiže ten management toho daného rozpočtu na ten daný deň je strašne dôležitý, aby sme vedeli, že nemáme neobmedzené množstvo, že aj mentálnej, aj fyzickej kapacity máme jedno množstvo každý deň, aj podľa toho, jak sa vyspíme, samozrejme asi.
To increase it?
Well, you're in a range.
Okay.
But there is a finite limit, upper limit for that range. Because you're a human organism and you've got to do these three things. these vital functions, growth and repair, and then everything else. If you've got a lot of psychosocial stress going on, or you have some kind of disease that's taking up.
Tak ja sa odpoviem, lebo už nemám množstvo. Na to nepotrebuješ nejak extra veľa energie. Ale jak chceš. Samozrejme, je to na tebe. Jak chceš.
Much of the budget, then you don't have a lot of budget left for other stuff that you need to do, right? So what your brain will attempt to do is to cut costs. If you look at the symptoms of depression, they are symptoms of that are related to cutting costs. Distress, fatigue, problems concentrating, lack of sensitivity to the context that you're in. All of these things are indicative of reduced metabolic outlay. And then depression also has symptoms that are related to increased costs. Like 70% of people who are depressed have inflammatory problems. So they have enhanced inflammatory, a systemic inflammation, and your immune system is a very expensive system to run. So if you have persistent and systemic inflammation, that's like a persistent tax on your budget.
To je super analogia s tým rozpočtom. To si vie podľa mňa každý predstaviť, že každé ráno staneš, máš 1000 eur na metabolizmus, na pracu, na aktivity, na hádku a dvakrát si rozmyslíš, že či chceš ísť do niečoho, napríklad to, že ťa niekto vytočí, a či chceš minúť tú energiu, respektíve to na tú hádku napríklad, alebo si povieš, že ten rozpočet si ušetrím, že nestojí mi to za to.
You're, meaning things are costing more than they necessarily need to. And even, there are these really interesting studies. I think they're interesting as a scientist, as a person. I find them slightly horrifying. But, if you, within 2 hours of eating a meal, if you encounter stress, social stress, it's as if you ate 104 more calories than you actually ate. So you're so inefficient in metabolizing that it's like having eaten 104 more calories than you did. And your even good fats will be metabolized as if they're bad fats.
And potentially stored as subcutaneous
So
fat.
if you add up 104 calories at every meal for a year, that's almost 11 pounds.
Počkaj, že keď mi zostane na konci dňa, tak sa môžem pohádať, aby som to minul. No, samozrejme. Ale po telefóne s niekým nie so mnou, dobré? A to určite neznamená teraz, čo hovorila, že keď si vystavený stresu, tak že keď sa naješ, že si vystavený stresu, tak že 104 kalórií, či koľko to povedala, tak minieš hneď kvôli tomu stresu, že teraz sa máš naschvál stresovať. To určite nie. Hej, ale že tým chcela naznačiť, predpokladám, že je to energeticky náročné ten stres. Že ten rozpočet na ten daný deň, fyzicky a mentálny, máš jeden, a že keď sa stresuješ extrémne, tak ti to proste stojí energiu, ktorú vieš využiť na niečo iné.
That means that if you are in a stressful environment and for a year and you eat exactly the same thing as you ate the year before, you would gain 11 pounds. In depression, we know, for example, that there's cortisol dysregulation in depression. That means there's dysregulation in metabolism, because cortisol is a metabolic, it's a metabolic chemical. People who take SSRIs, they take for depression, antidepressants are SSRIs usually, or SNRIs. That means they are acting on serotonin to keep more serotonin in the juncture between neurons. Serotonin is a metabolic regulator. Norepinephrine is a metabolic regulator. These are chemicals that are directly involved in your metabolism. So it's not a belief that depression is has a metabolic basis to it. I think the question is, what is the elixir of all these metabolic influences that would lead somebody to develop a depressive state. But
Pardon.
the simple point that I was making is I actually came to this idea about metabolism and depression because I was doing a shit ton of reading, trying to figure out how to help my kid.
What were her symptoms at that time? Just if there are any parents listening right now that can relate, or anybody that's listening that can relate.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that I've given this talk before about depression in adolescence. Adolescence is it's like a perfect storm of metabolic vulnerability for many, many reasons. You know, your brain is trapped in a dark, silent box called your skull. It's receiving signals from the body and from the world. It doesn't know what the causes of those signals are. It's receiving the effects. It has to guess at the causes. What are the guesses? Predictions from the past, right? So it doesn't know about hormone surges immediately as they happen. It takes 20 minutes or so, or sometimes a little less, depending on where the hormonal changes are and what their origin is, for the brain to receive the signals of those changes. And then it has to guess at what the causes are. The narrative that's used in psychiatry and medicine is a narrative that goes something like this. It goes back to this, like, your brain is a battleground, right? So the idea is that, you're born, the story is that you're born with these innate emotion circuits. You're not. You don't have innate emotion circuits. You don't have any emotion circuits, actually. But the narrative is you're born with these innate emotion circuits. They work, but you're not born with the ability to control them. That has to develop over time. So in adolescence, the idea is that mood disorders arise because you don't have enough cognitive control and you have too much emotion. So you've got this unbridled emotion, and that's the problem.
To je to, čo som hovoril vlastne minule, že keď sme ako ľudia trošku emocionálne negramotní, to tak poviem, že nedokážeme úplne detekovať tú emóciu, že čo sa tu vlastne deje a nedokážeme si vlastne ani všimnúť, tak je to prúser. Že ako náhle to dokážeme vyhodnotiť a vieme, že čo to je za emóciu, tak ju vieme aj lepšie regulovať.
That's a really compelling narrative. It's just neuro bullshit, basically. There's not good evidence for that narrative.
I heard it was a chemical imbalance.
Yes, well, sometimes people talk about that chemical imbalance in terms of serotonin being a happy chemical and dopamine being the reward chemical. And that's also, that's such a simplification that it's not even wrong. Okay? Dopamine is not a reward chemical and serotonin is not a happiness chemical. They're both metabolic regulators. You see increases in dopamine in some neurons during episodes of punishment. And serotonin does many things in your body in many places. But one of the things that it does in controlled experiments is it allows animals to to forage, to engage in activity, physical activity, and learning when there is no immediate metabolic reward at the end. There's no deposit at the end. Mm-hmm. So dopamine is seen more, I think, now by many neuroscientists as a chemical that is necessary for effort, whether that is a physical effort or learning something, a mental effort of learning something. It's not really specific to reward per se. So at first with my daughter, she went from being a really exuberant, engaged, very socially connected kid who, she did great in school. And it's not like she had, it's not like she was a perfect kid, but she was pretty enthusiastic and pretty exuberant and had a lot of friends. And then, by the time she was in 10th grade, she was withdrawn. She was getting D's in school. She couldn't concentrate. She wasn't sleeping. She was miserable. She was really...
Čo 10. trieda v Amerike? Čo to je u nás? To je akože výška? Či stredná? Neviem. Napíšte to do chatu, keď viete náhodou, alebo do komentára.
Really suffering, but she was miserable to be around. And to be honest, at the beginning, we thought she was being lazy. We thought, she didn't want to do anything. She wanted to spend all this time in her room. She didn't, she wanted to get rid of all of her activities. And we thought, come on, man, step up. Like, why are you, we thought she was being lazy. I mean,
inak to je častá reakcia, že my ako ľudia máme schopnosť veľmi rýchlo ohodnotiť toho druhého, že je napríklad lenivý. A to je tiež, že možno to tak aj je v tej situácii, ale častokrát to môže byť aj ináč. Že toto je super, že získavaš tie informácie a že môže to byť úplne ináč, že nevidíš celý ten kontext a tým pádom je dobre neodsúdiť úplne toho človeka, len na základe možno nejaké prvotné myšlienky, že tuto ako mama sa pozrela na dceru a myslela si, že je lenivá, ale pritom tá dcera nebola lenivá, že proste mala depresiu a že potrebovala to doriešiť najskôr.
Really, it just never occurred to me in a million years because she had no mood symptoms as a kid, like none. And then all of a sudden she appeared to have no energy to do anything. But to us, it looked like she was being lazy and she didn't want to do her homework and she seemed really disengaged. And it took me a while to realize, oh no, this is something else. She was having trouble remembering conversations that we had. And at first I thought, oh, you're not paying attention to me. But then it seemed really clear that even in day-to-day she couldn't tell me what was happening in her day. She just had no details. That's also a sign of depression, where you lose the episodic memory of details of the day. You can only talk in gists. You can't give specifics about times and places and events. You just lose. You don't retain that information long enough to be able to remember it later. There's no consolidation of that information. And when she was in 10th grade, she came home with D's in school, D's in mathematics. And this is a kid who was doing fun.
D's, akože štvorka skôr, nie? Akože, aspoň tak som to pochopil, nie? Že dvojka.
She was doing rudimentary algebra when she was 8. And we told her that we had to have her assessed because we just didn't know what was going on. And that's when we realized that she was clinically depressed. The other thing I should say is that, she had very bad menstrual cramps. And so a lot of one treatment for bad menstrual cramps is to put girls on birth control pills because it evens out the hormonal fluctuations of the month, and it does actually improve menstrual cramps. But it's pretty well known now, it wasn't so much known then, that there is somewhere between a 40 and 70% increase in the likelihood of major depressive episode in young women who use birth control pills. If it's a combination estrogen progesterone pill, it's more like 40%. If it's a progesterone only pill, which a lot of young women take because it has fewer side effects, you have a 70% increase in major depressive episode. And this is in this first study that I read about this was in 1 million women. And when I read that study, I remember exactly where I was. It was like a flashbulb moment. I read the study. I called her pediatrician, my daughter's pediatrician, and I said, she's coming off pill today. So tell me if there's anything, are there any side effects or can we just stop it? And he's like, well, in my opinion, and I'm like, I don't give a shit about your opinion. I have just read a study that is it's a large scale epidemiological study of 1 million women today. She's coming off today.
And this was after or before she was experiencing depression?
This was after. It was maybe a year after she was diagnosed. Much later.
Čiže jej ja som to pochopil správne, chat? Alebo pochopili ste to tak, že jej spôsobovala tá antikoncepcia depresiu? Že to tak bolo?
Sure. I was reading a book by Naomi Oreskes, the historian of science, and she wrote a book called Why Trust Science? And it's a wonderful book. But in the book, she gives examples of places, a phenomena where the public didn't trust science and they should have. And this is one of them. Apparently, it's been known for a really long time. And I just want to point out that estrogen, progesterone, testosterone evolved as metabolic regulators. I'm highlighting it because in a culture that separates mental from physical, we don't think about the role of metabolism in vision or even in mood. That's a really recent thing. In our lab, one of the things we study now is the role of metabolism in really basic psychological phenomena, like just as a fundamental building block of your mind, basically.
So your daughter exhibits those symptoms. I'm really curious to hear what conventional medicine at that point told you should do with the daughter in that situation at that time versus what you did. You have this wealth of information. You have a medical background.
Yeah, so I should say this was some years ago, right? So currently there is a kind of a revolution going on where there's actually something called metabolic psychiatry now. Back when I was reading about this, it sounded crazy. When I saw what my daughter that she was suffering, like really suffering, it's really hard for me to talk about this because as I'm talking to you about this, I'm thinking, I wish that I had figured this out earlier, but anyways, what we did was I found every possible route that I could think of to target her body budget. So basically target her metabolism. And then we basically came up with a daily routine, which she participated in making, to see if we could put her on a different trajectory, And that involved everything from getting off social media. Because first of all, she was using, like a lot of kids do, she was using her screens late at night. And at that point, and again, this was something I just happened upon, right? But it actually at a NCI meeting, at a National Cancer Institute meeting, we have retinal ganglion cells. We have cells in our retina that regulate circadian rhythm, and they're sensitive to light at the wavelengths that comes from a screen. So if you look at those screens at night, your brain thinks it's daytime, like your circadian rhythm. You give yourself a circadian rhythm disorder, basically.
Vieme.
And it will be harder to...
A toto je halus, že aj to všetci vieme, ale málo kto že nevieme to zmeniť úplne, že si to vyžaduje znovu také seba zaprenie. Akože dobre, tak hodíš ten telefon proste vedľa, ale je to závislosť, no.
Get into a regular sleep cycle, and you need that regular sleep cycle in order for toxins to clear and in order to consolidate what you've learned during the day so that you can remember it later. And there are a whole bunch of restorative things happen during deep sleep that you really need. And if you can't get enough deep sleep, that will make your budgeting problems worse, basically. So we targeted her. We got her off social media. Well, first of all, off screens after, like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, no screens.
Ale to je zase o tom, že keď sú nejaké také príznaky a poviem sam o sebe, že keď viem, že mám zhoršený spánok napríklad, a ja si pamätám, že keď som vysadil tie socky na 2 týždne, že som vymazal tie socky z telefónu, tak ten normálne, že ten mozog bol tak nacvičený, že som odomkol ten telefón a išiel som na to konkrétne miesto kliknúť, kde tie socky boli. Ale za 3 dní tuším, či koľko to trvalo plus minus, tak sa ten mozog odnaučil túto vec a už to nerobil a zlepšilo sa to. Fakt sa to zlepšilo a ja zvažujem, že to urobím znovu a odporúčam to fakt každému. Keď máš nad sebou nejaký výstražný trojuholník, že máš problémy so spánkom, si unavený počas dňa, máš nejaké problémy s úzkosťou, s depresiou a podobne, fakt treba rozmýšľať nad týmto. Akože rieši to samozrejme s odborníkom, ale jedna z vecí môže byť aj toto.
Off social media to reduce social uncertainty, social stress. I got up with her at 5:30 every morning, made her breakfast, sat with her while she ate breakfast, so made sure that she was eating nutritious food, not pseudo food, like, Pop-Tarts and shit like that. We had to start her like exercising again. So she started to walk long distances. She started doing Pilates, like not Pilates on a mat, but like Pilates with a reformer that would make anybody cry,
Why exercise as it relates to this budget and the metabolic functions?
Because exercise, basically, exercise throws your, it's like your brain, it's like you're throwing yourself out of metabolic balance so that the brain can learn to get itself back in. You're basically improving the resilience of your physical systems is basically the way to. So
to je hormeza, že si vystavený na schvál stresu, na ktorý sa adaptuješ a je to riadený stres, že nie je to nekontrolovateľný stres.
She's not, she needed something more like interval training, which is what these Pilates classes were, as opposed to, practicing to play tennis or whatever. Something that would where she, after a certain period of time, she'd be dysregulated metabolically, and then she'd drink water and, eat something healthful, and then her system basically was learning to become more flexible again. Not so stuck. So again, it was like dosing with prediction error, or like providing the brain with opportunity to learn that it was wrong. And then omega-3s. So we took, I can't remember the exact dose, but I dosed it out, high omega-3s, low omega-6s. With her doctor's permission, we also used a baby aspirin once a day on a full stomach to reduce systemic inflammation. Before bed, we had always done like a cuddle, like when she was little, we would read a story or whatever. And in her early adolescent years, she rejected that. And then we brought it back. So an hour before bed, we would, either me or her dad, sometimes all three of us, we would read a book together, or, he would read a book to us, or we would sit and talk, and she would tell me, all the things that were happening at school that she could remember. And sometimes they were really horrible. And I just had to empathize. That was really hard for me because I just wanted to fix it. And it was really...
Inak jej sa podľa mňa tiež častokrát nemuselo chcieť. Vieš, jej ako mame, že ona tiež musela mať niekedy zlý deň a že ona tam bola pre tú dcéru a asi s tým pracovala možno aj ona, že chce to napraviť, čiže tiež ju dostalo možno nejakú energiu navyše a že to je taká zvláštna úloha toho rodiča, nie? Že ja nie som rodič, takže to neviem úplne posúdiť, ale že vidím to na mame napríklad, že keď sa s niečím ozve mame, tak ona je schopná proste všetko hodiť a že ísť za tým dieťaťom to riešiť. Že to je taká zvláštna obeta toho človeka. A ešte som chcel druhú vec povedať, že všetky tie veci, o ktorých rozpráva, tak mi to pripomína, že my sa tak extrémne dokážeme vzdialiť. No ináč, pozeraj. Vidíš, už mi volá. Jaké by to počula? Nikdy nezabudni, alebo nikdy... Počkaj sekundu. Mami? Vysielam akurát na YouTube. Môžem ti zavolať potom? Je mi dobré, neboj. Čau. Prepojenie tam funguje. Vždycky, keď ti telefonuje rodič, tak to dvíni. Nikdy nevieš, kedy je to posledný krát. Takže a druhá vec, ktorá mi tam napadla, že vždycky mám pocit, keby sme sa dokázali veľmi vzdialiť od toho tela. To, na čo je zvyknuté, že to cvičenia, všetky tie veci, chôdza a podobne, to sú prirodzené veci pre to telo. Ísť do prírody, jesť dobré jedlo a tak ďalej, to sú všetko prirodzené veci a že my keď sa vzdialíme, napríklad, že sme veľa na telefónoch, sme iba za počítačom, nie sme v prírode a tak ďalej, takže my sa vzdialíme od toho tela a musíme sa vrátiť naspäť k sebe. Ako náhle sa dokážeme vrátiť k sebe, tak sa to zlepší. Iba to som chcel povedať, môžeme pokračovať.
Really, I had to really draw on my own experience as a therapist to just sit with the distress and empathize rather than say, do this, do this, do this, do this. It took me a long time to learn that, and I'm still sometimes struggling with that.
Why was that important?
Because then she feels heard and she feels understood. And it took me a long time to learn this. When she would tell me that, someone had done something terribly mean, if I did anything other than empathize, she would feel like I hadn't heard her. And social support is a major, we are the caretakers of each other's nervous systems. Humans are social animals. It's hard to believe, I think in a culture like ours where we're so individualistic, right? And it seems like a political statement or something. It doesn't really matter what your political views are. We evolved the way we evolved, man. We are social animals. We affect each other metabolically. We can add savings and we can add taxes. And, the best thing for a human nervous system is another human. The worst thing for a human nervous system is another human.
The wrong one.
There are so many experiments showing I just saw a set of experiments from one of my former postdocs that was just amazing, where she looked at glucose metabolism in mothers and babies. And I think she also did it in dating partners, if I'm not mistaken. And she looked at them alone and then together, like alone during a task and then together during a task. And mothers and babies that are attached well, their glucose metabolism is more efficient, like literally more efficient. And I believe she also showed this with dating partners too. There are these studies, these old studies showing that, it's like less calorically demanding to walk up a hill with a backpack if you're with a friend than if you're with a stranger. And there's all these really batshit crazy findings but if you realize that humans are literally affecting each other on a physical basis, whether they're aware of it or not, whether they intend it or not, it's completely irrelevant. Or it's unnecessary, I would say, to have that effect, to have the effects be there. Then it starts to make sense. Like the idea that, and again, meta-analyses show that you will live years longer, on average, years longer, if you have a social life filled with people who you trust and who trust you.
Je to tak? Tu máš modré zóny, nie? Tam to tiež bolo, že tí ľudia boli v komunitách, sa stretávali. Ako náhle je človek, ktorý zostane sedieť v kresle a pozerá len telenovely, čo je žiaľ častá realita, aj na Slovensku, smutná realita, tak to je proste v prdeli. Vtedy ten človek chrádne. Čiže stretávať sa a s ľuďmi samozrejme, s ktorými si vieš vytvoriť to púto. Že sme sociálne tvory, presne tak, jak to hovorí.
So is that why you got the family around just before bed? Because it was regulating her nervous system, her body.
Yeah, sometimes she still says this to me, actually. She'll say, "Can you just be my friend for a minute and not my mother?" I'll be like, "Yes, I can." And then I actually have to do it, which is sometimes hard. Or I will say to her, this is for parents, anybody who has an adolescent or an adult child, this is like one of my, I don't know how I came up with this, but it's like golden, right? I say to her, I'm having a mother moment where I feel the need to nag you about something. And if I can just nag you for a minute about it, I won't need to tell you again. So I'm basically asking her permission. Can I tell you this thing, which I really want to tell you? And I know you don't want to hear it, but you would be doing me a real kindness if you would just listen to me for a minute. And I know it's me. It's all me. It's not you. It's all on me. This is me. But it would be better if you could just let me.
To je super.
And most of the time she says, with great forbearance, right? Like, sure, Mama, go ahead. Sometimes she says, not today. And then I actually have to listen,
Oh, so funny.
So, yeah. But there were probably other things I'm not thinking of right now. I've written them all down because a lot of people have asked me this question. And what I like to say is, I'm not a physician. I'm not a psychiatrist. This is not a recommendation or recipe for your children. I'm just telling you what I did as a scientist.
And you wrote down what you did. You still have a copy of that, so I can link it below for anyone that does want to read what you did.
Yes, but it's
what you did for your daughter at that time.
Yeah, just as a person who had read the literature, this is not medical advice. I'm really strongly, and also I should say, you can't force your adolescent to do anything. You can't even force your kids really to do anything unless you threaten them with physical harm. They have to make that choice themselves, right?
And did she recover?
Yes, she did. And I think one of the reasons why she is good now, it's not that she never has challenges with her mood, but she understands them in physical terms. She doesn't understand her mood as being a psychological problem. She understands it as a symptom or a barometer of her body budget.
This is something I learned from your work while I was researching, which was really, really helpful to me. And it's pretty much exactly what you just said, which is sometimes I'm in a not so good mood. And if I'm not conscious about that, then the bad mood can wreak havoc, right? I can be short with people or whatever. And when I was reading your work and thinking about bad or good moods through the context of this body budget, it makes you pause for a second and go, what am I missing? And it makes you very conscious of what you then do. It almost makes you suddenly take hold of the wheel and go, okay, so there's a problem here. It's a physical problem. I didn't get sleep last night. I haven't eaten, whatever it might be. Be really aware of what this makes you do or feel or think, and the actions you need to take are maybe cancel everything you were planning today and go back to bed.
Well, but I think that you just put your finger on the really important thing. It's that it changes what you do next.
Yeah.
And that changes the trajectory of what happens. Mm-hmm. And I think this is really, it's not like a magic cure, but and again, but when someone is, when you feel really distressed, you either look to the world, like what is wrong with the world, or you look to yourself, what is wrong with me? And really it could be, maybe there is something wrong with the world. Maybe there is something wrong with you, but most likely there's a body budgeting problem. Even if it's the case that there's something wrong with the world, you're better equipped to deal with that thing if you are managing your body budget.
You really do need to design your calendar as...
Že ten rozpočet tela, že keď som vystresovaný, unavený a neviem čo, aspoň ja to znovu tak chápem u seba, tak budem citlivejší na to a senzitívnejší na to, že sa niečo deje. Samozrejme závisí od toho, koľko tých správ zbieram. Napríklad budem pozerať každú chvíľku politickú situáciu a neviem čo, tak jasné, že ma to potom bude triggerovať extrémne a budem extrémne násratý. Ale že vôbec sa mu nedopomôže, pokiaľ budem mať ten rozpočet už nízko. Že budem unavený, nevyspaný a podobne, tak sa to asi zhorší. Aspoň ja to tak chápem. A to hovorím za seba zase, hej. Keď máš na to nejaký iný názor, A je to samozrejme tvoj názor, je to v poriadku. A môžeš mi ho napísať.
As much as you possibly can in the confines of the profession you have around that body budget. And for me, a big change I made 2 years ago, super privileged, I get that, not everyone can do it. I couldn't do it when I was working in call centers, was I implemented a rule where there's no meetings before 11 o'clock. And it just means for me that I never set an alarm. So I wake up when I'm fully recharged. And it was like the most profound thing. I should have done this way sooner. But it's had such a big impact on my life. Because you can almost guarantee that it's very, very rare for me to be underslept. Although it happens, because I have to travel and stuff a lot. But that really had a profound impact on my life.
Yeah, and I think,
To si zariadím od zajtra. Zruším si budík a poviem klientom, že začnem chodiť, budem mať iba po obede.
And as a leader.
Srandujem.
Exactly. And I think, honestly, if leaders take this seriously, then the hope is that there'll be some realization that this is also important for everybody. And, we have a society that is structured in a particular way, but there's no requirement that it's structured in this way. There's, the biggest predictor of work productivity after, is sleep and hydration. And after you take away sleep and hydration, I think exercise is up there too. Some of us have more choices than others, right? But it's important, I think, for people who are CEOs, who are leaders, who are business leaders, to understand that there are good business reasons. There are good economic reasons to take this shit seriously.
Am I right in thinking that alcohol impacts your body budget? And it therefore makes it harder for you to exhibit all the other behaviors and expend energy in other areas, and also therefore increases the probability that you'll be depressed?
So, I should say that I am not an expert in the metabolism of alcohol. So I'm going to extrapolate based on what I do know. And what I would say there is that sometimes people will drink alcohol like they will eat chocolate, or, they're doing it for the taste or for the experience of, the ambiance and experience of it, right? But a lot of people end up using alcohol. They might start that way, or they might start because they're doing something with friends, but then they realize that it has a mood, it affects their mood. Anything which affects your mood, like people talk a lot about emotion regulation, but it's actually mood regulation. Again, your mood is these simple feelings that are with you all the time. Your brain is always regulating your body. Your body is always sending signals back to your brain, out of which it makes mood. Mm-hmm. So mood is a property of consciousness. It's with you always. Sometimes in moments you will make sense of the signals and the mood that goes with it in terms of the outside world. And that's when you experience emotion, right? Where your actions are relating the two together in terms of your mood. But a lot of the time we don't. We just experience mood as a property of consciousness. This is a delicious drink. That guy's an asshole. You're very trustworthy. The mood is embedded in the perception of the world. And when people, it's just like actually sometimes opioids have this effect also. They're mood altering, meaning they are, if they're manipulating your mood, they are manipulating your metabolism. And when people get addicted, they often get addicted because they're regulating their mood. They're attempting to reduce their suffering. Mm-hmm. The problem I shouldn't say the problem, because I don't know exactly how alcohol affects metabolism. My expectation is that it's not just in one way. And also, I do know there are context effects, actually. So you can drink exactly the same amount of alcohol and it can have different effects in different contexts. That totally blew my mind when I saw that research. So I'm thinking it's not a simple relationship. But one thing I do know is that your predictions become sloppier, and you don't take in prediction error you don't learn. You won't update any, so there, and your behaviors are not necessarily well calibrated to the situation that you're in, which can have all kinds of downstream difficult problems. You can make things in the downstream work.
Pijete alkohol? Chat. Ja osobne nemám tú potrebu. Ja som tak nastavený aj z minulosti, akože z detstva a podobne, že som videl, koľko to dokáže urobiť škody, že som si povedal, že nie. A to nehovorím, že keď som mal 20 alebo 25, tak jasné, že som pil, hej, alkohol, ale odkedy viem a o tele viacej a o tom, čo spôsobuje, tak si poviem, že príležitosne, OK. A že si poviem, že na čo by som to dával do svojho tela? Že keď to tam nemá žiadne využitie. Ja tomu rozumiem a znovu nehejtujem, keď niekto pije alkohol. Hej, je to každého osobná vec, ale ja osobne to vnímam tak, že v tom tele to nemá absolútne žiadne využitie. A keď idem von s niekým, tak si dokážem urobiť tú náladu presne tak, jak hovorila, že nie prostredníctvom alkoholu, ale jednoducho preto, že sa stretnem s ľuďmi, s ktorými sa chcem stretnúť napríklad, že ich mám rád a podobne. Tak neviem, jak to máte vy. Že ja mám takýto pohľad na alkohol. Že pre mňa je to vec, ktorá nemá v tele absolútne žiadne využitie. Naopak, telo sa ho snaží čo najrýchlejšie zbaviť. Prečo by som to dával do toho tela? Ale rozumiem tomu.
Worse for yourself and make it harder to do budgeting later.
Isn't it incredibly annoying when you're in a rush to leave your house, but you can't find your phone or mine? Might made to look on the Steve. Head over there. That's extra.com. And I've actually heard Stephen. I wanted to ask you about something I heard you say, and I've actually had other guests on my podcast say it, and I wasn't ever sure if it was true until I heard you say it, which is that we can change our emotions by smiling. Because if the brain is predicting, then presumably if I do a big smile and I go, yes, then the brain is going to predict good feelings and going to cause good feelings, etc., and going to cause me to feel nice about myself.
Well, yes and no. I think, people smile when they're not happy too. People smile when they're angry. People smile when they're plotting the demise of their enemy. People smile for all kinds. People smile when they're afraid.
But can I make myself happier technically by smiling?
The meta-analytic evidence suggests that there is a slight effect. That there's a small. Yeah. Crinkle. There you go. It's like.
Dneska som nad tým rozmýšľal, že keď sa usmejem, aj keď sa mi nechce usmievať, že či to dokáže ovplyvniť tú náladu.
Put a pencil between your teeth. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Now smile. Now crinkle. Okay. So it's like that. So what I would say is it's a minuscule effect size. Like it's very small.
I do feel happier.
Do you?
Yeah.
But that's because I made you do something silly, maybe?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. But anyways, the point being that it's overblown as an effect. I think there's a small. My recollection is that the last meta-analysis I read was that there was a small effect, but a small effect means it doesn't work for everyone and it doesn't work always. It's just really, really a very, very small effect.
You must have a perspective on ADHD, which has become a huge topic of conversation in society. I was diagnosed with ADHD. I don't necessarily take it to mean anything because I've seen so many variations of ADHD in my friends. But there's been this big rise of ADHD and linked to the work that you've done on the brain being a predictive tool.
So my general response is the following, that there's a rise in people self-diagnosing and in using diagnosis as an explanation for behavior or for why people experience what they experience or whatever. Diagnoses are not explanations of anything. They're descriptions. They don't explain anything. And to treat a diagnosis like it's an explanation is a form of essentializing, which is not a good thing. Okay, it means that you're assuming that there's some kind of underlying, unchanging essence, which is responsible for, in fact, there is something called psychological essentialism where you don't even know what the essence is. You just assume it's there and that it's the cause of all these symptoms. But a diagnosis is just a description of symptoms. And diagnoses are mostly useful for billing hours of treatment. They're not optimized for describing pockets of behavior that are, or collections of behavior that tend to go together.
Because people sometimes think that serotonin and dopamine are the reason why someone has ADHD. That's like one of the theories that I've...
So there are multiple serotonin receptors. There are multiple dopamine receptors. They don't all do the same thing. Serotonin doesn't do one thing. Dopamine doesn't do one thing, does different things in different places in the body and the brain, depending on what the receptors are. And also, every resource of resilience and every symptom of difficulty has a context to it. There are requirements, the way our society is structured, there are requirements for sitting and paying attention to something for long periods of time. Mm-hmm. And that requirement is hidden in the background. It's there so frequently that we forget that that's the condition upon which diagnoses are made. So first of all, ADHD is not one set of symptoms. It's a variety. There's a lot of variation in the way that you can have different symptom profiles and have the same diagnosis because it's just descriptive and there are lots of symptoms. Some of those symptoms also they overlap with other syndromes, other diagnostic clusters. But the point is that when you diagnose someone, it makes it sound like that's a property of that person.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's a property of a person in the context that they're in.
Mm. And social expectation by many respects, like can he pay attention in school?
Well, right. And the way that school is organized is, you sit for long periods of time. Well, it may be that there are other circumstances in which not holding your attention on one thing for a long period of time could be advantageous. So my point is that there are very few things that are just categorically good or categorically bad. There's always a hidden condition. Sure. There's always a hidden context. And so I think it's really important to foreground that context.
You're not broken. You're just, your suitability to a certain context has been deemed to be doesn't fit.
It's not productive for that context.
Vieš, ale veľa ľudí, neveľa, ale tak možno niektorí povedia, že však, ale kedysi to bolo normálne, že museli sedieť tí ľudia, alebo tie deti v škole na hodine a dávať pozor proste 45 minút a že to také nebolo. No hej, ale to bolo úplne iná doba, keď si tak vezmeš, že teraz si oveľa viacej bombardovaný sockami, technológiami a podobne, že úplne iný svet.
Context. And that may sound like weasel words, or it may sound, but it's not because it's important that competencies are by context. And again, I would say this is not, being a bleeding heart, progressive or whatever. I mean, I am a bleeding heart progressive, but this is not an example of that. This is an example of me being pragmatic.
You can regulate each other, something you talked about earlier on, which I found really, really interesting. I was reading about a study of 25,000 people, and they found that people having a heart attack were 14% more likely to survive if they were married. But the other thing that I found interesting is that we regulate each other with words. And I think you did a study on assessing the power of words to facilitate emotion. It was a study you co-authored.
Well, we've studied the power of words in many contexts, including words as invitations to make sense of, so if an instance of emotion is you making meaning of what is going on inside your body in relation to the world, then you invite every time you use an emotion word, you invite people to make meaning in that way.
So you've proven then that certain words can calm us down.
Well, yes, but I wouldn't say I've proven anything. Scientists don't,
Shown, demonstrated.
yeah, demonstrated in a context, right? Like scientists don't like the F word, the fact. Oh, I like the other F word, but the fact. That's a tough one because it means something that holds under all circumstances in all contexts. And that's very rarely the case. So, but yes, we have. So, and I mean, so if you've done it probably a million times, you text things to people, do you not?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you text a couple of words to your partner or your friend, you can change their heart rate. You change their breathing rate. You can change all kinds of chemicals, all kinds of protein synthesis just with a couple of words. Again, we live in free speech is important. Freedoms are important, but freedoms come with responsibilities. Like it or not, we regulate each other's nervous systems in all kinds of ways, including with words. And
for better or for worse.
For better or for worse. Exactly. And so
you've really made me think differently about stress as well, generally, because if I think about my life through the lens of this metabolic budget and stress is a burden to this budget, then if I don't limit my stress, I'm much more likely to go over budget. And if I go over budget, my immune system might be the thing that I cut the costs of, or something else.
Right. I mean, there's good stress. You can't be without stress. That would mean you'd be without effort. So, sometimes scientists will talk about good stress and bad stress, which really just means stress that is planned and where you replenish what you spend, and stress that is pernicious and you don't.
Chronic stress.
Chronic stress or. So what I would say is just, if you're in a stressful meeting, a meeting where it's affecting your mood, that means there's been some metabolic impact. Take into account what that means.
With all that you know about the brain, I wondered if it's changed your view at all on religion and God and spirituality, and if there is a higher power at all. The brain is such a wonderfully complex, beautiful thing. It's the objective observer in 2025 looks at a brain and goes, this is fantastic. Many people then conclude that there must be a creator of that brain. But also we've talked so much today about meaning and the point of it all. So everything you've learned about the brain and neuroscience and psychology, has it made you believe in a God?
No.
Has it made you more atheist or agnostic?
I'm pretty firmly an atheist. I don't think that the wondrous complexity of nature or the brain or the nervous system requires a designer. And that logic doesn't make sense to me.
So this is obviously a terrible leap, but do you therefore think that there's no inherent meaning to life outside of, the reproduction and...
I'm just reading for the second time this book. It's called Open Socrates.
Okay.
And it's a really wonderful book. And I've learned a lot about Socratic philosophy that I didn't know. And one of the things that Socrates thought was important was asking this question of what is meaning, and that you shouldn't be asking this question in 15-minute increments. You should be really asking this question about the expanse of your life. And so I think, if anything, being a scientist who studies how a brain in constant conversation with a body and the other brains and bodies in our world and even the physical nature of our world, how that creates lots of different kinds of minds, including our very Western mind. That makes me think more about the importance of philosophy, actually, because I think philosophy is asking the same kinds of questions that religious belief tries to answer. And for me, that's a better path. I think it's a more comfortable path. I've often been asking questions like this my whole life, actually. So it makes me feel more like, what's the point? Like, what is the ultimate point? I think the answer for me, the ultimate point, is to leave the world a little better than I found it. It's like the Johnny Appleseed, philosophy. Like as a scientist, scientists often, a lot of us, we don't do what we do for money. Money's not bad, but we don't do what we do for money. We do it for other motivations, right? To know, to be curious, to try to discover things. And at some point we start to think about, well, what's your legacy, right? Most of us are not Darwin. We're not William James. We're not, Heisenberg. We're not, most of us are not those people. So what's your legacy? And in the end, I realized that I've published a lot of peer review papers. When people introduce me, they give some kind of about my citation, people, whatever.
Dr. Lisa is one of the most influential figures in the field of emotion, neuroscience, and the nature of the brain. She is among the top 0.1% cited scientists in the world for her revolutionary research in psychology and neuroscience.
Yeah, that's all nice, super nice. But actually, my legacy is really the people who I've trained, the minds that I've had the opportunity to engage with. And if I were going to be bean counting, I might be bean counting the number of laboratories that now exist that didn't exist before. Several generations of scientists who I trained, or who and also who trained me, along the way. So that's my legacy in some ways, really. It's the people and the ideas. And I would like to think, just to wrap up to where we started, when I used to do a lot of classroom teaching, I would feel like what I told myself is, if I can change the trajectory, the outcomes of just one person in this class, just one, then I will have done my job, And I kind of feel that way a little bit, sort of the same about the public face of what I'm doing, right? The public science education. If I can help, if something that I've learned or something I've communicated can help somebody else live a more intentional life of with agency, where they're choosing and they're impacting their loved ones or their children, then I've done my job. That's my legacy. And the hard thing about that kind of a legacy of ideas impacting people's lives, is that you don't ever know what your impact is. But that's part of the deal.
We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing.
Nepotrebujeme. No. Takže máme to za sebou. A ja sa prepnem sem. Dám toto trošku tiššie. A chcel som povedať ešte pár slov na záver. Že za mňa to bola veľmi dobrá debata. Aj tá prvá epizóda, aj tá druhá. Neviem, ako to vnímate vy, ale mne sa to veľmi páčilo. Mne sa páčila ona ako človek, aj jej myšlienky, že boli veľmi zaujímavé, aj z toho psychologického, aj z toho neurovedeckého hľadiska. A myslím si, že rozmýšľam nad tým, ako hovorila napríklad aj ona, že máš nejaký budget na ten daný deň, čo sa týka tvojho nejakého fyzického, mentálneho rozpočtu, a je na tebe, že ako si to rozvrhneš. Môžeš to urobiť lepšie, môžeš to urobiť horšie, a to samozrejme ovplyvní potom ten výsledok. Ale myslí na to, že všetky tie veci, ktoré robíš, alebo ktoré robíme, aj ja ich robím, tak ovplyvňujú samozrejme jednak ten výsledok, ale takisto aj učia ten mozog, ako bude fungovať v priebehu času. Čiže keď budem ten svoj mozog učiť, že sa má nastaviť takto, poviem príklad, že vždycky si vyťahnem niečo z toho šuflíka a zjem to, sladké napríklad, tak učím, že vždycky, keď sa stane niečo, tak mám ísť do toho šuflíka a zobrať si to. A keď, samozrejme to odnaučenie trvá nejaký čas, ale že dokážem to prepísať. Dokážem to úplne v pohode prepísať. Že to je, samozrejme vyžaduje si to nejakú vôľu a jedno s druhým a plus samozrejme pracovať na tom rozpočte, aby sa zväčšoval. Čiže aby sme mali k dispozícii možno viacej tej fyzickej mentálnej kapacity, čiže lepší spánok, aby sme vedeli fungovať na druhý deň a podobne. Aby, tak ako hovorila napríklad aj, že ten imunitný systém je veľmi náročný na spotrebu, čiže na ten rozpočet, ktorý máme na ten daný deň. A pokiaľ máme už ten náš rozpočet minutý z nejakých aktivít, ja neviem, práca, stres, neviem čo všetko, tak ten rozpočet sme minuli a ten imunitný systém už nevie fungovať tak dobre a práve preto sme napríklad tak často chorí. Že bolo tam veľmi veľa také zaujímavých myšlienok, však určite si pozri aj tú jednotku a to je odo mňa na dnes všetko. Ja pripravím samozrejme nejakú zaujímavú tému zase na budúce a nezabudni milovať sám seba, milovať svoj život a snaž sa vychádzať s ľuďmi okolo seba. Takže s láskou, Bajo, maj sa